The golden hour stretched across the dusty frontier town of Cedar Ridge, painting everything in warm honey light. Eleanor May stood on the wooden platform of the train station, her heart hammering beneath the fitted bodice of her gray traveling dress. The fabric was simple but well made, with tiny pearl buttons running down the front, and sleeves that puffed gently at her shoulders before tapering to her wrists. She clutched a worn leather satchel in one hand and a crumpled letter in the other, the letter that had brought her here, across 3 states and 1,000 miles of uncertainty, to meet a man she knew only through carefully written words on paper. The evening air carried the scent of sage and distant woods. Somewhere in town, a church bell told the hour. 6 o'clock, their agreed meeting time. Eleanor May had been corresponding with Samuel Hartwell for 8 months. His letters spoke of wide-open spaces, of cattle that grazed under endless skies, of a ranch house that sat alone on rolling hills where a man could think and a woman could find peace. But most of all, his words painted pictures of loneliness that matched her own. She had written back, sharing stories of her life in St. Louis, of her work as a seamstress, of dreams that felt too big for the narrow streets and crowded boarding houses of the city. In her letters, she had been careful to sound mature and settled. At 22, she feared she might seem too young for a man who wrote with such gravity about life and responsibility, so she had adjusted the truth, just a little. In her letters, she was 26, old enough to know her own mind. She had reasoned, old enough to make such a momentous decision as traveling west to marry a stranger. Now, standing in the amber light of the setting sun, that small deception felt as heavy as a stone in her chest. Miss Patterson. The voice was deep and gentle, with a slight rasp that suggested long hours spent calling to cattle across open range. Eleanor May turned and felt her breath catch. Samuel Hartwell stood before her, and he was nothing like she had imagined. She had pictured someone, weathered and stern, made hard by frontier life. Instead, she found herself looking into kind brown eyes set in a face that, while marked by sun and wind, held a gentleness that made her shoulders relax without her realizing it. He was tall, with broad shoulders beneath a brown leather vest worn over a checkered shirt. His dark hair showed threads of silver at the temples, and when he removed his wide-brimmed hat, she could see laugh lines around his eyes that spoke of a man who found joy even in a hard life. "Mr. Hartwell," she managed, her voice smaller than she had intended. "Samuel, please," he said, and his smile was warm and real. "I hope the journey wasn't too difficult." "It was an adventure," Eleanor May replied, and was surprised when he laughed, a rich, genuine sound that seemed to chase away some of her nervousness. "That's one way to put it," Samuel said. "Come, let me get your trunk. I imagine you're tired and hungry." As he lifted her belongings with easy strength, Eleanor May found herself studying his profile. There was something solid about him, something that made her feel anchored after months of floating uncertainty. His movements were deliberate but never rushed, and when he spoke, it was with the careful consideration of someone who had learned that words mattered. They walked together toward a sturdy wagon, hitched to 2 patient horses. The town around them was settling into evening quiet, with warm yellow light beginning to glow in windows and the sound of families calling to each other across porches and garden gates. "Your letters," Samuel said, as he helped her up onto the wagon seat. "They painted such clear pictures. I felt like I already knew you." Eleanor May's stomach twisted. "Did they? The way you wrote about morning light on cobblestones, about the sound of rain on your boarding house window. You have a poet's eye for beauty." He settled beside her and took up the reins. "That's a rare gift." The horses began their steady clip-clop through the dusty main street. Eleanor May watched the town pass by, the general store with its painted sign, the blacksmith's shop still glowing with forge light, children playing in the last rays of sunlight. Everything felt both foreign and somehow right, as if she were seeing a life she was meant to live but had never imagined possible. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, partly to fill the comfortable silence and partly to avoid talking about herself. Samuel's face lit up. "It's 15 miles north of here, up in the foothills. The house isn't grand, but it's solid. Built it myself over 2 summers. There's a view from the front porch that stretches all the way to the mountains." He glanced at her. "I hope you'll like wide open spaces. Some folks find them lonely." "I think," Eleanor May said slowly, "that I've been lonely in crowds. Wide spaces sound ... peaceful." Something in her tone made Samuel look at her more carefully. "You sound like you're running from something." The observation was gentle but perceptive, and Eleanor May felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Not running from, running to. Maybe that's a better kind of running," Samuel said. They rode in comfortable quiet as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The town fell behind them, and soon they were traveling through grassland that rolled away like a green gold sea. Eleanor May had never seen so much space, so much sky. It made her feel both very small and somehow larger than she had ever been. "Samuel," she said finally, the weight of her deception growing heavier with each mile. "I need to tell you something." He didn't look at her, but she saw his hands tighten slightly on the reins. All right, in my letters, I wasn't entirely truthful about something. Now he did turn to look at her, his expression calm but attentive. Go on. Eleanor May took a deep breath of the sage-scented air. I told you I was 26. I'm not, I'm 22. I was afraid, I was afraid you'd think me too young, too foolish to make such a decision. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon wheels and the soft snuffling of the horses. Eleanor May felt her heart sink with each passing second. Finally, he spoke. That's a fair-sized worry to carry across 3 states. Yes, she whispered. Can I tell you something, Eleanor May? His voice was thoughtful, not angry as she had feared. I've lived 38 years on this earth. I've seen men of 50 make choices that would shame a child, and I've seen young women show wisdom that would humble a grandfather. He guided the horses around a gentle bend in the road, and ahead, Eleanor May could see a house silhouetted against the evening sky, solid and welcoming, with smoke rising from its chimney. The woman who wrote to me about finding beauty in morning light, Samuel continued, who chose to travel 1,000 miles to build a new life with a stranger. That woman has courage that has nothing to do with how many years she's lived. Eleanor May felt tears prick at her eyes. You're not angry. Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and turned to face her fully. Eleanor May, I've been alone on this land for 5 years. I've measured time in seasons and cattle drives, in long winter evenings with only my own thoughts for company. You know what I learned in all those quiet hours. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Love doesn't count years, he said simply. It counts moments. Moments of kindness. Moments of understanding. Moments when 2 people look at the same sunset and feel less alone in the world. He climbed down from the wagon and came around to help her down. As his strong hands settled on her waist to lift her to the ground, Eleanor May looked into his eyes and saw something that made her heart flutter with hope. The age you wrote in your letters, Samuel said as he set her gently on her feet. That was just numbers on paper? The heart that wrote those letters, that's real. That's what I fell in love with. Eleanor May stood in the golden light of evening, surrounded by more space and possibility than she had ever imagined, and felt something inside her chest unfold like a flower turning toward the sun. Come, Samuel said, offering his arm. Let me show you home. As they walked toward the house together, Eleanor May realized that sometimes the most important journeys begin not with a single step, but with the courage to stop running from who you are and start running toward who you might become. The western sky blazed with the last light of day, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly in the gathering dusk. It was the sound of a life waiting to be lived, of moments yet to be counted, of love that measured itself not in years but in the infinite possibility of tomorrow.